The second video dedicated to the Tudor dynasty is about Henry VIII, who was born in 1509 and died in 1547. As we discussed in the other video, Henry VIII is the legitimate successor to the throne of England of Henry VII, who, as we have said, took over the throne of England after the Battle of Bosworth, defeating both the Lancasters and the York. As we also have said, it is important to understand that the main issue concerning Henry VIII's reign rotates essentially around the male descendant that he had to secure for the throne at all costs. That is because, as we have said, the Tudors did not have royal blood, and their claim to the throne was never really secure, and therefore, especially Henry VIII, went out of his way to ensure that he had a male heir. As we have said, he came to the throne at the age of 18. As a matter of fact, he wasn't born as the heir to the throne. There was a previous offspring before him, his older brother Arthur, who was in fact raised as the legitimate heir to the throne. Unfortunately, Arthur died before Henry VII. Therefore, it was Henry VIII who took over the throne at his father's death. The first thing that we must say, outlining the personal characteristics of this important monarch in English history, is that he was considered a typical Renaissance prince. He was very polished, very cultured. He had a rich education. He was a scholar of theology and was very much interested in astronomy. Among his famous pastimes, he had hunting, dancing, dallying, and playing the lute as well. He was a man of his time, we can say, and a very rich and lavished patron of the arts. Soon after ascending the throne, he married his late brother's widow after asking a dispensation of the Pope, because since he was already related to his brother's wife, there had to be a special permission granted by the Pope in order for him to marry her. This was a very shrewd choice because Catherine of Aragon, that is the name of the queen, was the aunt of the Spanish Emperor Charles V. This way, Henry VIII intended to bind in a special relationship England to what at the time was one of the most important countries of Europe, Spain, as we have said. Unfortunately, Catherine of Aragon, who was much older than the king, was not successful in giving him a male heir. After several failing attempts, she had quite a number of miscarriages. She gave birth to a baby girl whose name was Mary. Unfortunately, the king was very disappointed, and even though he wanted to stay loyal to his vows to the queen, when in time it became quite clear that Catherine of Aragon would not be able to give him a male heir, he turned to a lover who he did everything in his power to marry. Her name was Anne Boleyn. She's also another very important figure of English history. At the beginning, the relationship between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn was very passionate, very intimate, and she did her best to get the king to marry her. In order to marry her, though, King Henry VIII had to get an annulment from the Catholic Church. Now, considering that in order to marry Catherine of Aragon in the first place, he had requested a special permission of the Pope, it becomes clear that another of such similar request proved to put under strains the relationship with the Catholic Church. And in fact, the Pope refused to grant him the annulment because he was afraid that this would displease the Spanish Emperor and ruin the relationship that was very strong between the Church and the Spanish Empire. Therefore, the Pope refused to grant King Henry VIII's annulment of the marriage. But the king was also set on obtaining in some way a divorce from the previous queen, and that's exactly what he did. He went along and, against all odds, decided to divorce from Catherine of Aragon. This resulting in the excommunication of the Catholic Church. Despite his great grief, because he did feel deeply tied to the Catholic Church, and he himself was a very religious man, to the point that some even thought that King Henry believed that his barren marriage, or the fact that he did not get a male heir, was due to the fact that God considered it as the appropriate punishment for because he had married his brother's widow. However, putting aside all this, what we must underline is the fact that despite his closeness to the Catholic Church and to the Catholic religion, he went along with his plans, divorced, therefore, as we've said, Catherine of Aragon, married Anne Boleyn, and totally broke any sort of relationship with the Catholic Church. This, in turn, resulted in the Act of Supremacy, which was legitimized by Parliament. The Act of Supremacy, which was signed in 1534, is a document, is a king's proclamation of himself as the supreme head of the Church of England. The fact that Parliament gave it total approval by suppressing all monks' orders and closing down monasteries whose wealth and lands was then immediately transferred to the crown, also benefited economically Henry's choice. This, though, led to another difficult choice by Henry, because Thomas More, who was at the time the Bishop of Canterbury, strongly opposed Henry's decision, and therefore did everything in his power to convince him that it wasn't the best choice to break with the Catholic Church. Eventually, because Henry did not enjoy being contradicted and being ostracized by the people he considered to be on his side, especially counting on the loyalty of Thomas More, he first accused him of treason and then had him sentenced to death. The fact that Thomas More was executed paved the way, to a certain extent, to Protestantism, because it allowed, first of all, Henry VIII to have the Bible translated from Latin to English. And this was a very important strategy that he adopted, because in fact it warned the English people to the new turn of events, because being very independent of their own, and as we have studied with past chapters, we know that the conversion of the English to the Catholic religion was not easy, and it entailed many adaptation of their original rites and many and of their feasts and beliefs to the new religion, so as to allow them to warm to it. So the fact that the Bible was being translated, and therefore any mediation was removed from the people and their direct relationship with God, certainly benefited King Henry VIII in the face of his people, who greatly appreciated this this development, and even the break with the Catholic Church was not considered as particularly traumatic, considering also that at this time a Protestant surge was going through Europe, thanks to Martin Luther's 95 Theses and his indignant denunciation of the Roman Church's widespread corruption. All of this allowed the English to accept the king's decision easily, and had Henry benefit from it extensively. Next chapter will deal with King Edward and Mary Tudor.